Hey folks, this is Kelani. With the Warfronts being one of the key parts of this newest expansion, wouldn't it be fantastic if we had a few more of them? I'm hearing a lot of no's right now, but hear me out. We'll ignore that Warfronts haven't gotten off to a great start, and we'll ignore that they're currently leaving a lot to be desired, and also the part where you have to wait nearly 4 weeks until the system cycles around to have another chance at World Boss Loot or a decent 370 item from the Scenario Quest. Maybe we should just imagine that Warfronts didn't open up yet, but honestly I think a lot of the problems players are having with Warfronts right now could be addressed by adding in a few more to offset the long cycle times. If we're stuck to the 4-week cycle, which from the recent AMA it seems like we most definitely are, having another Warfront active which is set up to work on an opposite cycle would mean that both the Horde and the Alliance have a scenario at the same time, both have contributions at the same time, and both are able to kill a world boss at the same time. No waiting around for 2 weeks with barely anything to do, no apparent faction bias. It sounds like the perfect band-aid to slap over this gaping wound. All that's left is to decide which zones or areas make the most sense for a new Warfront, and then wait for Blizzard to knock it all together so we can watch players AFK through more scenarios. Let's have a look at a few zones which could make amazing Warfronts for when Blizzard decides to open up a few more 4-week cycles. So what does it take for a zone or area to be worth turning into a Warfront? Well, at this point I think it has to be in the old world, most likely in some of the vanilla zones which can be easily converted into an area full of rares to farm, with maybe a world boss crammed in there too. We'll need 2 strongholds, one for the Alliance and one for the Horde, which they can trade back and forth because that appears to be how Warfronts work overall, even though some PvP elements would be a nice touch later on down the line. We need plenty of trees for lumber and a mine or 2 for the iron. Some maps and Warfronts could even have new resources which match up with the zones to provide a unique experience for that specific Warfront. I would hope that each Warfront that is introduced has at least one unique feature or plays out a little differently from the Warfront in Arathi Highlands. Some may not use wood or iron, some may not require building up a full base, some could be more skirmish focused instead of full-blown sieges. With all of that in mind, I think there's a few locations which would work very well as Warfronts. The first is kind of the Arathi Highlands of Kalimdor, the Barrens. The Barrens was always a hotspot for world PvP because of its proximity to Orgrimmar, but also because it was one of the first contested areas you would explore on that side of the world. Ever since Deathwing reshaped several zones, the Barrens has been cut in two. I'm thinking the Southern Barrens would be the most likely candidate for a Warfront. It's got a few camps for both factions, and the gates to Mulgore definitely seem worth fighting over for both sides, the Alliance to gain a foothold right on the doorstep of a Horde capital of Thunderbluff, and the Horde to maintain their control over the Barrens and the land surrounding their main cities. Where the Arathi Highlands are more about securing the bottleneck of the Eastern Kingdoms, this one could be more about the Alliance going on the offensive to really try and push the Horde back. They might end up continuing what they started so long ago when they trampled over poor Camp Tarajo. When it comes to bases of operation, we have a few options for both factions. On the Alliance side, we have Baal Modan down at the bottom, which is a dwarven fortress built into the hills of the Barrens. It doesn't look like it would need much extra fortification, but that excavation that's been going on for the last 10 years might have to wrap it up sometime soon. A little further north we also have Fort Triumph, which probably will need a few extra fortifications. It's looking a little run down at the moment, but hey, if the entire zone gets a revamp to go along with the Warfront, then that's no problem at all. And then the last spot where the Alliance might bunker down is more of a camp than a fortress right now, but Forward Command has quite a few siege engines ready to go. Fast forward a few years and they might have turned this camp into a more defensible structure. If that's the case, then it could be a perfect staging point for the Alliance's assault. But where are they going to assault? Over on the Horde side, we have 2 larger camps which could be their chosen Warfront base. The first is Vendetta Point, a small Tauren camp which is situated right next to the Great Gate. It might not look like much right now, but it's not too crazy to think the Tauren would want a few more defenses right next to the big gate that leads directly to their capital city. If Mulgore is really the Alliance's target, taking out the outpost right next to it would be one of their main objectives. But there is another Horde stronghold in the Southern Barrens, Desolation Hold. It's actually right across from Fort Triumph, and it already looks like a heavily fortified position, so that would make the most sense if nothing huge changes across the map. Any of these camps could become the Warfront base, depending on what they decide to change, but remember that we're going to need at least a little space between the 2 strongholds to get some midway points to take over. I think the Barrens could have a more of a camp-based approach to Warfronts because wood seems to be a little scarce around here. There's also only the one mine that I can find right now, so we might use the same mine for both Horde and Alliance, or they'll just conjure one up out of the nether. I guess we'll have to wait and see. I would love to see more Tauren focused buildings here, seeing as we're so close to Thunderbluff. Now, if the Barrens aren't turned into a warfront, we could just head up a bit further north and set one up in Ashenvale. Ashenvale has been fought over since the very start of World of Warcraft, and one of the first battlegrounds was actually set in Ashenvale. Back in the day, you had to run over to Ashenvale to queue into Warsong Gulch. Good times, but we hadn't really seen much action over there until the Horde went trampling through to reach their main target of Teldrassil. Well, what happens after that? Surely the Night Elves want to push back at least a little bit. It seems like Ashenvale would make for a beautiful Warfront scenario as well, and there's plenty of bases and strongholds to choose from. It could be just what they needed to re-establish a foothold in northern Kalimdor. For the Alliance, I would say they're probably pushing to retake Astranar more than anything, maybe with a few extra camps here and there, but the Horde could start their assault from Zorangar Outpost, Splinter Tree Post, or even the Warsong Lumber Camp. There's so much potential here in Ashenvale, I would be very surprised if we didn't end up fighting over it in a Warfront scenario. If it's never turned into a Warfront, I hope at least something happens here due to the massive war with the Night Elves at Teldrassil. It would be a fantastic opportunity to have Night Elf themed structures on the Alliance side as well, and I think as more and more Warfronts are added, any little change like different building models, different objectives, or even different resources will go a long way to making them feel like more than just a copy-paste of Arathi Highlands. As for resources, there's certainly no shortage of wood in Ashenvale, even though we've apparently been logging here for quite a while now. Those are some magically replenishing trees, alright. Speaking of which, they could add in an enchanted lumber resource which you have to get from very specific areas. Instead of siege engines for the Alliance side, you could recruit the ancient protectors just like in Warcraft 3. On the Horde side, well, I bet that enchanted lumber might help create some awesome catapults. But maybe the Alliance would rather push onto the Horde's capital cities rather than trying to retake an area which might not hold a great deal of value with Teldrassil gone. There's two other areas which fit the bill for preparing for a siege on some of the Horde's capitals. The first would be Ajara, right on the Horde's doorstep. Ajara has also been a target very recently, with the Alliance trying to corner the Trade Prince Gallywix. Their hunt led them to his pleasure palace in Ajara, where they did a bit of ransacking and party crashing before leaving the place a right mess. It's fairly accessible by sea as well, so it's not too far-fetched to think the Alliance could set up a base of operations so close to Orgrimmar, and Bilgewater Harbour would make for a great launching point for any Alliance siege. This could be a unique warfront where both factions are vying for control over one stronghold instead of having their own base. The Alliance could start on either a dropship or a boat and start taking control of the camps on the mainland, cutting off supplies and travel to the harbour, and pushing forward at the end to wrestle control from the goblins. The Horde could just as easily start from Orgrimmar, take back the camps and do the exact same thing, pushing the Alliance out of Ajara in the meantime. Either that, or we could just end up with two new strongholds somewhere. I guess either would work. One thing I really hope that an Ajara warfront would make use of is the Goblin Rocket Way. Instead of the typical flight pass getting you from place to place faster, incorporate that awesome track in some way for a nice change of pace. Ajara could have an oil resource which could be used to fuel ferry ships if we end up attacking or defending the harbour, or for various other siege devices that might not be used in other warfronts. There could be shredders, mechanospiders, explosives, you name it. This could even end up being a gnome versus goblin deal if they really wanted to set it up that way. This kind of warfront would also push the point home that yes, we are at war here. No matter what it looks like on our little BFA islands, serious stuff is going down on the mainland. The Alliance is preparing to assault some Horde cities, the Horde might be prepping to hit some Alliance cities. These warfronts really do need to be the selling point on that war, and I don't think Arathi has done a great job so far. The other city that could find itself under siege is the last Horde city in the Eastern Kingdoms, the glorious Blood Elven capital of Silvermoon. Not really somewhere a lot of players end up visiting very often, but with the Undercity reduced to blight-filled rubble, the Horde only has one real foothold on that continent. If Silvermoon would fall, the Eastern Kingdoms would truly belong to the Alliance. I could see this happening in a variety of zones. They could set up shop in Eversong Woods, right on Silvermoon's doorstep, but I doubt the Blood Elves would allow the Alliance to get so close without putting up a huge fight. It could be one zone down in the Ghostlands, a little further away from Silvermoon, and I could see how the Alliance would be able to set up a stronghold there without too much issue, or it could be even further south still in the Plaguelands. I think that's a little less likely because it's quite far away if their objective is Silvermoon, Maybe it could be something starting in Ghostlands and moving up to Eversong, because I doubt we'll ever see Silvermoon fall, so the Warfront would probably be fighting over two smaller fortresses in either Eversong Woods or the Ghostlands. Eversong would definitely be the prettier option, and if the Alliance start right on the very tip of the southern border, I guess that would give them plenty of room to work their way upwards. I guess it depends on how the Alliance is getting up north. If they go by airship, I guess they can drop wherever they want, which is kind of lame, but if they go by sea, Sunsail Anchorage would be the perfect place to launch their assault. It's decently south-ish, gives plenty of room for the Warfront to actually take place, and makes sense of how they can claim a foothold so quickly and easily without having to stomp through the Plaguelands and the Ghostlands, which are definitely not places you want to march an army through. There are a few other spots like Fairbreeze Village and both of the Sanctums, but I think we'll see some significant overhauling of Eversong if a Warfront is ever placed here. It would be cool to see some Blood Elf buildings, and the Horde could even rebuild the ruins of Silvermoon and use that as their base of operations. It would kind of suck seeing that portion rebuilt only to get ransacked by the Alliance every 4 weeks, but it could give the entire Warfront a larger sense of meaning if we're attacking and defending part of a capital city. And just in case you were thinking some of these might be a bit too far-fetched, some files in-game might point towards 3 Warfronts which have already been semi-planned out. One in the Barrens, one relating to Silvermoon, and another one in Ajara. So those 3 are more likely than the other one right now, but these aren't guaranteed, set in stone, data mined in their entirety plans. They are very much an initial pointer, which means we could see all of these Warfronts, or we could see none of them at all, but I do think some of these areas would make for perfect Warfronts. I just hope they change things up every time a new Warfront comes out. Different objectives, different buildings, different resources. I don't really care, as long as the experience doesn't feel exactly like the Arathi Highlands Warfront, but just placed in a different zone. I think the dev team needs to up their game if they really want to impress us, but I'm excited to see what they can do with this feature and with all the feedback they've been receiving about our first taste of Warfronts. Where do you think we'll see the next Warfront? How many do you think we'll end up with by the time Battle for Azeroth comes to a close? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.